So the way we want to talk broadly about innovation, entrepreneurship at MIT. And so the way we're going to do this is I'm going to ask each of them to briefly introduce themselves. And then I have some specific questions for them. And then there's a general question if we're liking questions. But then I'm going to open it up to all of you to ask questions of them. Okay, so first of all, why don't you introduce yourself? So Paulo, who are you?
Oh, I'm Paulo Lozano. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Aeroastro here at MIT, and I have been at MIT for 30 years, starting as a student. And actually, one of my first meetings at MIT was with you. Oh, okay. And probably you don't remember that.
Was I pleasant at least?
Yeah, very pleasant. And I run the Space Propulsion Lab at MIT.
Okay, my turn. All right, I'm Fiona Murray. I'm a professor here at the School of Management, where I teach deep tech ventures, defense and dual use ventures, and a whole bunch of classes focused on entrepreneurship, especially the sort of lab to market flavor. I'm also chair of something called the NATO Innovation Fund, which is a venture capital fund set up by NATO, which includes amongst its investments a bunch of companies that are focused on space tech.
Yeah, Bill.
My name is Bill Aulet. I'm the Ethernet Inventors Professor of the Practice, which means I'm not a real professor. I'm a professor of the practice. And I'm an entrepreneur by design and an accidental academic, and I've been teaching entrepreneurship here for 20 years. And I'm spun 3 companies out of MIT. First one not successful, second one infinitely more successful, because anything divided by 0 is infinity. It's good at math. At MIT, they like math jokes.
Even in the afternoon.
And the third one was a company called Visage, which was incredibly successful in 2.5 years. And I worked less hard in that one than I did in the previous 2. And I realized entrepreneurship is something that could be taught. And actually, you can learn it. And it's not that difficult if you take an engineering approach. And let me just say, it's great to be here. I feel like an aero-astro person in and out. Yep, Ali Dweck, David Mendel I've been working with, Julie Shaw, Dava Newman, Paulo. I feel like I deserve an honorary doctorate.
Almost.
Actually, I don't deserve anything, but I feel like I'm part of the family.
Okay, I'm going to start with you, Paulo, the question. You've been associated with a number of companies, Axion, Revolution, Electrophy, right? Electrify. Yeah. Tell us about your experiences there. You should tell them what they are, right?
Well, these are ideas that start in the laboratory and then they end up as companies. And I think that it's a different story for every different company. But in my case, I believe that everything started with the passion of research and innovation. And for example, the story of Axion Systems came from really research that I did very early on something called electrospraying that could potentially be used for propulsion in space. And the idea actually looked pretty neat. And some of my students actually had a very strong interest in entrepreneurship. And they decided to form a company. And we had a whole bunch of IP that we submitted to the TLO here at MIT. And which actually, the ecosystem at MIT was very helpful in allowing the students to, to get the support that they require to form a company and acquire the IP, the licensing, and move forward in creating something that could be scalable for applications in space. And that story actually was very successful in the sense that, they pushed the technology forward. There are a lot of lessons that I can, if you ask me, I can say a few stories there if you like. But the main lesson with Axion Systems, and now actually it's called Revolution Space because it was acquired, is that it's always very important to have the technology ready, not as a finished product, TRL9 kind of product, but it's very important to have a clear path of how the technology works, what it needs. Even before you start to actually get into the whole labyrinth of entrepreneurship. I think that sometimes the technological aspect, how ready is a technology, is not really taken into consideration. So, but I think that that's very important. In the other case of Electrify, it's very different from Action, because in that case, it was the passion of a group of, a student really in my group, who actually had a very clear vision of how to connect the dots between the technical work that he was doing for propulsion and the need in a field that is completely different. I'm talking about, in pharma, basically.
Wow.
And, but he was able to make the connections and move forward, and had a very strong entrepreneurial spirit. And that company was also acquired recently and very successfully. And I maybe Bill will talk a little bit about that.
Well, let me ask Fiona now. You teach this Deep Tech Ventures course here.
Yep.
On how to build, fund, and scale ventures, such as many for space economy, which people here are interested in. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that and what you've learned and what you see.
Sure. So look, I mean, when I first got to MIT, I think it was still a period, and that was 20-something. I'm not even going to say the number because it's more than 20 years ago. Teaching entrepreneurship, as Bill rightly said, is something that was, I think, still people were skeptical about. But increasingly there is a view, and I think it's exactly right, that there are a whole bunch of tools and techniques that we can teach. One of the things that became really clear to me, and particularly in working with a lot of these sort of lab-based spin-outs and things where people have significant sort of new technology at the frontier of science and technology, is that when you're not working in software, you're working in hardware. The capital requirements are very significant. There's a tremendous amount of risk. There's, of course, market and customer risk. Do you have real customers? But there's also technical risk. There's regulation, and there's scaling. You've got to be able to produce things at scale. You've got to be able to build the value chains, the supply chains, and increasingly deal with the geopolitics. And so teaching a course on deep tech ventures was about, how do you go from understanding the foundations in entrepreneurship to then applying them in these lab-to-market kinds of companies where you really are doing something that will take, the word deep is really about the deep wells of risk, but the deep wells of time and patience that you need. So how do you go about doing that really in a capital-efficient kind of way? But interestingly, I think in the course, one of the places where we begin is about the people. That it would be very easy to talk about this in the abstract, but it's always about the people that you put together. It's about the technical individuals, the people who understand markets, who understand the customer journey, and trying to sort of build those teams so that you can then really go on this quite long and complex journey together, including with your investors. And so the course is really designed to kind of take those lessons and kind of sort of develop them with some really specific examples, whether or not we're applying them in energy and climate systems, and the space economy, and defense and security, and health. But again, in areas where there's a lot of capital needed to really solve these incredibly large challenges. And so we talk about some space companies, we talk about Planet, I was talking to Aulet about them earlier, but also companies like ESA Aerospace, which is a German space launch company, and Propulsion, which is another propulsion-based company that spun out of, was founded by a friend and former student of mine from the European Space Agency. And so I think the space economy has many of the characteristics of the kinds of businesses we're thinking about. And the other course that I think is part of this series of ventures courses, Bill set up the energy ventures kind of course and has really led that, health tech ventures. We're now teaching a defense and dual use ventures class that's particularly for companies that are in the defense and dual use space, because dealing with government as customer is a really difficult thing. You have to be quite patient. And when you're trying to do both, and that's often true in space, then there are some really particular things that are worth talking about and worth learning.
So tell us about the students who come to your class.
So in that course, we have a combination. We have a whole bunch of MBA students, and it's quite fun for me. I spent a while teaching our mid-career exec MBAs. I now teach the MBAs again, which I'm really enjoying, as well as the sort of mid-career executive MBAs. And then I have quite a lot of master's students from SDM, as well as PhDs from all across campus, who occasionally spontaneously will sort of stand up if you ask them and help the other colleagues and other students understand, quantum sensing or something. It's that special thing, I think, about being here, that ability to sort of cross-register across campus. And we even have some folks who come from Harvard, is what makes the classroom dynamic, I think, really interesting. We work on projects with some of the existing deep tech ventures in this ecosystem, and having these mixed teams is logistically complicated, but really, I think, fantastic for cross-institute learning.
All right, great. So, Bill, you run the Martin Trust Center. Well, first of all, tell us more about that. And secondly, what have you seen in terms of successes and failures with the students who come through there?
Yeah, so the Trust Center is, MIT is a very decentralized place, and that has good news and bad news to it. The good news is that it lets 1,000 flowers bloom. The bad news is sometimes you got to weed the garden. It's not clear what are weeds and what are flowers. But it has created this dynamic of lots of fast-moving innovation. And the Trust Center has become kind of the umbrella, the largest one. You know, we're kind of been around since 1961. Ed Roberts, for those of you who don't know who he was, he kind of set it up. And we kind of connect the students to what resources they need. We teach many courses. We run extracurricular programs like Delta V, which Natalia for Axion went through. And so we're kind of a hub. We also teach classes. We do extracurricular programs, but we'll connect to the Technology Licensing Office, to Venture Mentoring Service, Deshpande, whatever. I think the interesting question is, what makes for successful entrepreneurs in this space? And it was funny because when you sent this out last night, and then I got it this morning and started thinking about it, I always like specificity, because entrepreneurship is not about generalities, it's about specificity. So I went back and I went to Axion, and Paulo and I were just talking about that. So we went back to the founders and talked to them, and talked to what other space tech things do we have. We have Ryan Seng, who started a company called Shield.ai, which I don't know how many of you know what Shield AI is. Do you know what that is? Yeah, it's a Deca unicorn now. It's worth $13 billion. Another student, Ian Cinnamon, just started this company called Apex, which has just become a Deca unicorn. And ironically, this company called Electrify, which no one's heard of, that you were just talking about, which came out of AeroAstro. Yeah. And you know, it's not about money, it's about impact at MIT. Mm-hmm. But impact has relationship to the value of the company. And what makes for these companies to be successful? And it goes back to a simple equation that we talk about in my book. Innovation equals invention times commercialization. In innovation, something that creates impact for the world, that makes money, that provides positive return for a company value, equals invention. Invention is a patent, a technology. Those things cost you money. They don't make you money. Let me be clear. Most patents in the world are never used for anything. They're only valuable, they only become innovation if they are commercialized and somebody figures out what they're useful for. And I think this simple equation is an oversimplification, and Einstein seeks simplicity and distrust it. But I think you've got to have both invention and commercialization. And entrepreneurship is a commercialization. Mm-hmm. And if we look at these, the best invention does not create the most innovation. Mm-hmm. And this Electrify is an electrifying example of this, if I can use the pun. Electrify comes out of Paulo's lab. It's a propulsion technology that was used for Axion. Axion is this great company, gets all this interest, and basically, if we can be blunt here, it's actually sold for the government contract even more than the technology. It got a big government contract, and this is why it's sold to Cerberus. And it has great technology. Electrify, on the other hand, looks at this technology and says, you know, we could use this for bandages. We could create these bandages, spray-on bandages. They go around, they hire people to do this. They go, what? The dogs aren't eating the dog food. They don't want this. This is a problem that they think needs to be solved, but that's not what the customers want. And so in one of the interviews, they're speaking to Pfizer, and Pfizer said, wait a second. Is there a way to use this to apply drugs subcutaneously as opposed to through IV? Yeah. They're like, no, we want bandages. And someone says, wait, listen to the customer. Listen to the customer. What you're selling, they don't want. They're not going to pay for. It sounds like Pfizer will pay for this. And they go back and Pfizer said, we'd absolutely pay for this. And so to just go forward and make a story faster, Electrify is sold for essentially $1 billion. And they haven't even gone through, because they solve a real problem that customers want for the spraying technology. And it is not what Chase and Jason sent out to solve, right, Paulo? It's not what you guys thought at the beginning. And this is the nature of entrepreneurship, is you've got to listen to the customers and solve the problem they want. And so going back to your question, Dan, is, and I could go through these other examples of, is Apex a great technology? It is not. It is just repackaged technology, but it's what the customers want. And they're worth $1 billion, and they're having a tremendous impact, basically, doing space stuff using car manufacturing.
Right.
But I tell you that story because we at MIT over-indexed for the importance of invention, and we under-indexed for the value of a commercialization. And you don't need to take that from me. You take that from a guy named Bengt Holmstrom, who was over in E52. He walks around with a medal. It's called a Nobel Prize. He actually doesn't walk around with it, but I see it every time I see him. And he says, innovative technology is overrated in praise of imitation. And over 90% of the value in the world is created by people who take an existing invention and figure out how to apply this to a market. This is exactly what Steve Jobs did at Apple. He did not invent the Windows icon. He took that out of Xerox PARC. But they had invention, but they had no commercialization. So great invention times 0 equals 0. But what he did is he laterally innovated, that means steal, the invention from Xerox PARC and figured out who was the customer for it. And then he did the same thing with MP3 technology, and he goes on to say, great artists steal, he said, good artists create, great artists steal, which that very quote is stolen from Pablo Picasso. I'm sorry, laterally innovated from Pablo Picasso. But here's the
Translated.
point. Translated. True, to be correct. But my point here is that what I see is that people who get obsessed with technology, people who get obsessed with a product are less successful. I'm not saying they never succeed. Their odds of success are much lower than people who get obsessed with solving a customer problem. And if you get obsessed with solving a customer problem, turns out your odds of being a successful entrepreneur in terms of impact are much, much higher.
Yeah. And don't you think that that's the reason why the people matters, the team matters so much?
You're 100%.
Is that sort of, if you've got the right team of people, your ability to actually listen and to question and to go on that journey of finding exactly the best way to create value from this, often from these underlying technologies, is so much dependent on the human beings. Because it's not a formula. You can't actually just sort of assume this pathway. The pathway kind of evolves, and it really is about the group of people, which is why I think this notion that it's all about the humans involved is really key.
Yeah, the least important thing in a startup is the original idea.
Okay.
The most important thing is the team.
Yeah.
And when you look at success over time, and Matt Marks and Noam Wasserman and Ed Roberts have done this research, and the team is the most important thing. Give me a great team with a mediocre idea, and they'll beat a great technology with a mediocre team every day of the week and twice on Saturday and Sunday.
All right. Well, so before we open it up to general questions, so let's just probe that a bit. There are a number of students here. Suppose there is a student who has an idea, mediocre or great. Also, perhaps they have some idea of forming a team, and they think they know what the customer space might be. What should they do here? I mean, how would they then move forward here at MIT?
I would say I'm completely in agreement of what Bill just said, and I think that it's just not thinking that these things are done in a vacuum. And there are resources.
Funny coming from you, space propulsion in a vacuum.
In a vacuum. They are operated in a vacuum. It doesn't mean they are, teaming up is the most important part, of course. You know, you need, and that's why I suppose that there is no recipe really to create a successful company, you know, or a successful project. Because every time that you want to do this is going to depend on who's behind it.
Yeah.
And I think that you have to be willing to let some of your ego go, and really team up.
Yeah.
And create the same amount of passion that you have for a project, and try to be contagious about that, and you know, find people that resonate with that idea, and people to challenge you too.
Yeah.
You know, because also finding the weak spots on your ideas is also very important. So I think that overall, if you have a great idea, is run it through someone. I mean, you have to find someone that you trust. And also, again, be aware of all the resources that you have available to you to actually bring your ideas to fruition.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I would just add to that is this point about sharing it with people. You know, the number of times that students will walk into my office or elsewhere and say, you know, I have this really, really good idea, but I can't tell you.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so it's a fantastic idea, but I can't tell you, will you sign a non-disclosure agreement? And I literally laugh. Right? I mean, if your idea is that good, then the fact that you've just described it to me isn't the be-all and the end-all, right? The idea is more complex. There's probably quite a lot of tacit knowledge associated with it, and it is just, as Bill said, the start of a journey. And so being willing to talk to other people about it, to go and get advice. And if you can't convince anyone that your idea has some sort of resonance, that it's a journey that you and the plan that you have is worth pursuing, then that's probably a signal as well to you that you might want to sort of go away and rethink and reimagine, or bring other, because if you can bring a few people, you've got to bring people on your journey, right? You've got to bring other students, you've got to bring faculty advisors, you have to persuade some people in the Trust Centre who'll give you some tough love about whether this makes sense. Ultimately, on this journey, you're then going to have to go and persuade other employees to come and join you, to give up their time and the alternatives to come and be part of what you're doing. And so that tells us a few things, right? It says you've got to be willing to share and describe and adapt and listen, gather information from other people. Really need to, I think, be willing to be open to how your idea will adapt and evolve. And it's also fine at some point to say, you know what, this particular pathway isn't for me. This idea is not the one that I'm going to spend the next 3 years on. I'm going to stop, I might join somebody else's project, I might carry on, take a job in some amazing other company, and then a little later in my career. I think there are many moments at which you can both start and stop an entrepreneurial journey. And sometimes the art is actually in knowing when to stop, because it's not a brilliant use of your time. But all the resources here on campus, I think, are absolutely focused on this being not only for you to build amazing businesses if you want to, but actually to be educated, right? We are an educational institution. Our job is not actually to create as many businesses as possible, although we do like to count those things and measure them, but frankly, it's to make sure that everybody here gets the best education and support, whether it's faculty in their journeys or students. And so I think everything that we try to do on campus is in service of that. So you're kind of learning in general while you're working on your particular project. And I think the Trust Centre is a place where that definitely happens.
And what Fiona said, we always just say, stealthy is unhealthy. Yeah. You know, this idea that someone overheard your conversation at a coffee shop and they created $1 billion company. If that's true, you're just a loser. Yeah. I mean, it's about execution. It's not about like the idea. Yeah. And there's this great, by the way, how many of you are students here? Yeah. Here's my advice. Sign up for the AeroAstro certificate, right, Ali? Do you still have room in the program? Mm-hmm. Yeah, sign up for the AeroAstro. You get an advisor, you get structure around it, it will help you. You're all entrepreneurs. You can become better human beings are born entrepreneurial. You should become, whether you start a company or not, you should become a better entrepreneur, because Paulo's an entrepreneur, but he's an academic entrepreneur. There's uppercase E entrepreneurs who go out and venture-backed startups, and then there's lowercase e who are very entrepreneurial, and we can really get into this. This is a mindset, skill set, and way of operating that in a fast-moving world, every human being can have and should have. And if you don't, you're crazy. Let me repeat to all you students, you're crazy if you don't take entrepreneurship while you're here. Otherwise, you're just going to become job seekers when you have an opportunity to become job creators. You can create your own job and you can control your own destiny, or you can go seek a job from somebody else. It's much better to be able to create your own job. So I would strongly encourage you to do that.
So on that note, let's open it up to questions from the audience. There should be a microphone somewhere that goes around. So questions? And you can direct it at any of them or all of them.
This one over
Oh, there's a question right there. Out of the student row.
there. We like that.
Hello. So I feel like a big.
So why don't you introduce yourself?
My name's Carol. I'm a first-year grad student here, and
In Aeroastro?
in Aeroastro.
Yeah.
And I think like one big barrier to like starting a business, at least for me or for I feel like a lot of people, is like fear of failure. Do you have any recommendations on getting past like that mental hurdle, or techniques for doing that?
Yeah. Do you know the safest place for a boat is in the harbor?
That's not what boats are for.
That's not what boats are built for.
There's a song.
Is it a
Oh,
song?
yeah, I love it. I'm going to give it to you later.
Will you sing it for us, Paulo?
Jesus, maybe I laterally innovated it without
Maybe
knowing
you
it.
did. Say, look, again, in whatever
Is-
language.
Wait, what is the song?
My Robertson song.
Really?
Yeah, ships are safe at harbor.
Yeah. You didn't come to MIT to just be mediocre, right? You want to be a leader. I tell you, we're just doing this committee for Sally Kornbluth and Ananta, the president provost now, and we're done over 100 interviews, and it's really, really interesting because a lot of these people who go out and start these venture-backed companies are what we call well-informed, well-resourced people. What's that mean? That means they come from rich families where their parents talk to them about venture capital and term sheets and valuations at home. But over 30% of the undergraduate population at MIT is first generation low income. That is MIT, just to be clear. MIT is the #1 social mobility school in the elite universities by far, by far. You don't get in here because your mommy and daddy are rich. You get in here because you're smart, you have a unique story. It's a beautiful thing. And so you look at these students when they first get here and they're like, I want security. I want security. And they think entrepreneurship is risky. But if we teach them entrepreneurship, do you know what the percent of people who go through our Delta V program who are in business 5 years later is? This is people like yourself. They go through all our programs. The survival rate 5 years later is 69%.
Very good.
Let me write that, 69%. And the people who don't start those companies they don't pursue, are actually more successful than the people who stick with their original company. Because the second time you do it, as research shows, you're more likely to be successful because you know more. I don't know the number, but if you go get a secure job at a corporate place like Amazon, do you think you're going to be working there 5 years later at the rate of 69%? I would say you would not be. You could get a fabulously secure job at the US Postal Service, and you will probably be out of a job in 5 years. Again, I'll go back to the best way to get security in your life, the best way to be a leader is to become an entrepreneur. And so is failure part of the process? Failure is 100% of the process. Do you run experiments? Do you run experiments? Do they all work? What do you learn more from the ones that work or ones that don't work? The failures, right. And that's what, if you want to be great, you've got to do that. As Fiona will probably tell you, I'm an elite basketball player. You probably all know that. What are you laughing about? What are you laughing about?
It was the elite part, I think, Bill, that I was going. You used to be an elite basketball player, but you're still a basketball player.
Watch, tough love.
I have like half a leg, so, or an ankle, so I can't do anything.
Don't make me pull out my gold medal, all right? So you talk to any great person, they will tell you you don't get great by fearing failure. You don't like failure. Let me be clear. If you like failure, you're a loser. Failure sucks. If you like failure, become a New York Mets fan. It is the worst thing in the world, right? You gotta hate failure, but you know it's part of the process. It happens on Tuesday, and you get up and say, I'm not gonna let that happen on Wednesday. Do you know where the safest place to fail is?
Here. Yeah,
Right here.
that's what I was going to say.
This is there will never be a safer space for you to fail than right here. And we will help you. And I wish I had done this. My first company, I'm sorry, I'll shorten this. My first company was called Cambridge Decision Dynamics. It is in deep, deep stealth mode. Do you know what that means? It's out of business. And my wife used to say, why do you call this a job? In a job, money comes into the household. In your job, money's just going out of the household. Do you know what the best education I ever got was? It wasn't my useless undergraduate engineering degree from Harvard. It was not my degree from MIT. It was my starting Cambridge Decision Dynamics, because I learned so much about that. And say, Paulo will tell you, the people who start the companies, Jason and Chase, they got PhDs in business now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the only way you learn it. You got to get on the field and get your nose bloodied. And there's never a better time to do it. The support structure, going to what everybody said, is fantastic here.
That's what I was going to say. Is look, I think some people will say, well, we don't have an idea we want to work on, but the people around you do. And so there's that. There's working with, joining a team and being part of that and working in these programs. There's leading a team. And as Bill said, and I agree with him, and I think, Paulo, we all see this, because this is an educational institution, you get to try things out. And I think it's the trying things out that's incredibly important. We know that when people take their next step in their careers, they're kind of trying things out for size. And so they're sort of saying, does this fit me? How do I want to be? What kind of role do I want in the startup, right? Do I want to be the CEO? Do I want to be the CTO? Am I going to focus on the business side, the technical side? And I think trying out those different things, even some of the classes we teach, people go off and do projects with existing startups. That also gives you a little bit of a sense of that culture. And the more you build that up, then I think the more it becomes something that you get to say, do I want to then lead this with my own particular idea? But absolutely, there's so many resources on campus. I mean, Bill's right. You have to be an entrepreneur to navigate your way around those resources. But increasingly, I think they have become more accessible, more comprehensible. And this is the brilliant place to try and to learn.
All right.
Can I just make 2 quick points? Fiona just agreed with me, so that means I am an elite basketball player.
It really does, doesn't it? You know, you really are.
And secondly, just see me afterwards. There's a fabulous book here called The New Lunar Society, written by David Mendel, which is not the book I'm going to give you, but it's a great book. But I'll give you this book right here.
Oh, yeah. I have the book. Yeah. Very good.
So I gave you a little play there, David. I saw you walk back in the room. I recognized the customer.
All right. Other questions?
Hello, my name is Quentin Millette. I'm a second-year PhD student in strategic management. In entrepreneurship, oftentimes you'll have to pivot from an idea or close a venture or even kill a project or experiment. Do you guys have any thoughts on when is the right time to either move on from a venture or a project or kill an experiment?
You do experiments?
Oh, well, if you let us speak, we'll take it all the time.
All the time,
Yeah,
right? All the
so-
time. I think that I totally get what you're saying, because sometimes it's a little bit unpredictable when things are going to work. But I think that's part of an answer of the previous question too, right? Because you cannot be just thinking that there is a linear progression of success and try to project on it, right? It's always going to be like this. But what I would say is that that's what you need a team for. You really need to be able to see all the factors together of why something might not work and what's the right time to actually get rid of it. But at the same time, you really have to try, because otherwise things won't happen. And you have to be able to, again, as the previous question was, be able to support failure and be comfortable with it, as long as you don't make a habit of it. The quick answer is I don't know, right? I don't know exactly when you want to kill an idea. But what I know is that many of the ideas that we have, we feel very passionate about. And attachment is the problem.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't want to let go. That's why I'm saying that we need a team around us that tell us, at this point you have to let go of this thing that you love so much. because otherwise it's very hard to do it ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, humans have this thing called confirmation bias, right? When you see something, your idea is your baby, you think it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. And I think there's this really interesting tension and important that we all experience with things that we're working on, which has to do with, how long do I pursue it because I'm absolutely convinced and I've got that sense of conviction and commitment to something. But when all the evidence is pointing the other way, and again, I think the team is a hugely important piece of that. In entrepreneurship, investors are a part of that. Now you have to, if you can't convince anybody, then at some point, if you need external capital, you have to really think about what signal the market is sending you. If you can't convince customers to buy, I mean, that's probably the single most important thing. And the other thing I sort of think about both for my own work and the work I do with the fund that I chair and so on, is just to sort of remind us all that your time is the most valuable thing you have. And so if you think about the value of your time, stopping is often the most valuable thing you can do, because then you have the time to try the next thing and to work on the next thing.
I'll make 2 points. First of all, just building off what was just said there, there's this perception that entrepreneurship is this solo mercurial thing. You got to be Elon Musk or you got to be Steve Jobs, where you're this superhero.
Yeah.
That is, the technical term is bullshit, right? Entrepreneurship is a team sport. Individuals don't get much done in this world, almost nothing. It's teams that get stuff done. And if you don't have a team that's kind of checking you out on this whole thing, you're not going to be successful. Your really odds are just so low. So don't believe those movies and stuff that you read. And the thing about Steve Jobs is he rewrote history. He wrote out Wozniak. He wrote out Mark Mercula. He wrote out a lot of people to make it seem like it was a solo. It wasn't. And we know that from research, that teams, think about how complex it is today. You've got to have regulation, you've got to have technology, you've got to have more complicated finances than ever, you've got to have go-to-market, you've got to incorporate it. You've got to have a team. So that's the first thing. The second point I'd make is, there's a great book that we have our students read. It's called That Will Never Work. That Will Never Work. It's a book by a guy named Mark Randolph, who was the co-founder of Netflix, who's, by the way, going to be one of our coaches, mentors in the Delta V program this year, which is now $75,000. But he said, he has this idea for Netflix. He goes, Blockbuster, what a stupid idea. Why don't we mail this out? And he goes home and he tells his wife, are you married, sir? So you don't understand this. Anytime you have a new idea and you tell your spouse of a new idea, that's a stupid idea. That's just called being married. And then, so he goes home and tells his wife, she goes, that's a stupid idea, that will never work. And he goes, oh, well, blah, blah, blah. So you go through this whole book, and Netflix is going public. And at the end of the book, he's going to go home, and you're like, all right, he's going to tell his wife, see, it worked. He at the end of the book, he goes, my wife was so right. The original idea we had was so wrong in so many ways. We didn't know what we didn't know. And the whole point of Netflix is nobody knows anything. All you can do is come up with intelligent hypotheses that you test over and over and over again, and you iterate on them. And if you have that humility, you're going to be a lot better off, because then you're going to be able to say, I'm going to let the data, I'm going to let the customer lead me where to go. And the last point is, I'll just say is, in our class we play this song, The Gambler by Kenny Rogers. You got to know when to hold and when to fold. The worst advice you can give to a startup person is never give up, never give up, never give up. Because the nature of startup is you're always giving up on bad hypotheses and trying to figure out what the right one is. And if you can't give up on it, then you're a problem. And the question really is this idea not going to work? It's when you look around the room and you look around at the team and you say, this team is not going to work. That's when you give up on it. But Electrify's idea did not work. But they looked around the room and they said, this team will find a new thing. And they found a new thing, and they sell the company for $1 billion. So there are always problems to solve if you have a good team.
Let's just probe that a little bit. So you've talked repeatedly about a team. What are the kind of skills and people you want on your team if you think you're starting something?
Oh, I'll talk all day.
Basketball players, no.
Elite basketball players.
Elite basketball players. But certainly somebody who understands sports analogies, which leaves some of us, particularly foreigners, a little bit, having a little bit of a difficult time. I mean, look, I think that, there are lots of programs. I mean, we run them at Sloan, the Gordon Engineering Leadership Center. I mean, there's a lot of work, I think, around leadership more broadly that's really important, and much of that has to do with, how do you engage with other humans? How do you listen well? But how do you lead and make hard decisions on behalf of teams and listen to information and be very informed about that? I think having a team that probably the worst thing to do is the thing that is the easiest, right? Birds of a feather flock together. We know that we are all much more comfortable with people who are like us. So if we left ourselves as humans to our own devices and we built a team, we basically build a team made up of people who basically are friends. And our friends tend to be more like us. They will have similar social backgrounds, they'll have similar sort of pastimes that they like to do and so on. If you do that, you're very likely to end up in a kind of groupthink, where the information that you're getting, the networks that you connect to are exactly the same. And so you're actually really narrowing the scope of information that you're bringing in and the perspectives that you're bringing in. And so what we know about the best performing teams is that they are the ones that have the most diverse types of humans. And by that, I mean people who come from different backgrounds with different lived experiences, with different skill sets, often with different personalities, who will see the world differently to one another. We also know that those teams are the most difficult. So they are, when they perform well, they are the most high performing. They're also the ones that are the most likely to implode, because the frictions that you have with people who are really different from you are really high. And so it's a difficult and uncomfortable thing to build a really high performing team, but they tend to have people who they focus on a shared goal, but they come at it in very, very different ways. I don't know if that's how you build your lab.
I totally agree. And you need someone in your team that is the glue.
Yeah.
Someone that is able to eliminate some of that friction or learn how to handle it. And you need a person. But I agree. You need the diversity of ideas, and you need an heterogeneous group. If everybody's thinking the same, you
just convince yourself that you're all right,
and you convince yourself of all your wrong ideas. Yeah, I totally agree. But at the same time, if it's too much friction, then it's really very hard to work with your team, and the team ends up fragmenting. And sometimes that naturally happens, and it's a good thing. The people find their own right balance. But in the process, can be very.
It's difficult.
Yeah, it's very difficult.
Doing a startup is like getting married. It is a
lot of work.
What? No. It's not whether you like someone or not like them. That's not the case. That's not the question. The question is, do you produce something great? Yeah. And to do that, you have to get different skills on a team. Like, you can't have, like, let's just say you're playing soccer. We can understand soccer. You might have 5 of the best goalies in the world. Right. That doesn't make a great team, right? You've got to have someone who scores goals, someone plays midfield, someone who's a great goalie, if I can use that sports analogy.
Also defense. You need a good defense.
Yeah, whatever it is. I think there's 3 things. First of all, you have to have, at the most fundamental level, you have to have, to get innovation, you have to have someone who's a good inventor. You have to have Chase in the electrify, and then you have to have Jason on the business side. That doesn't mean the business person's the CEO, by the way. Right. No. But you need someone who's good at commercialization, someone who's good at invention. You might also need someone who's good at policy. Yeah. Like in energy, you need someone who's good at policy. Yeah. So you need people who play different positions here. But they need to be respectful of each other, and they need to be able to get along with each other. The second thing I would say is what high-performance teams is we see 3 things. One, they have a common vision. They're like, we want to democratize education. We want to end food scarcity. We want to make the world a more socially equitable place, whatever. So you have to have a common vision. That does not mean product. That means we're solving this big problem. Then they have to have shared values. If they don't trust each other, you don't have a high-performance team. Right. So you have to have this cultural question here of shared values. The third thing is the complementary skills. You have to have people, someone's a hustler, someone's a hacker, someone's a hipster about design, someone's a wonk who cares about policy. The last thing I'll say, that even you can do all those rational things, but you have to have energy amplification. Yeah. And by that I mean 1 + 1 in a startup when it comes to human beings never equals 2. If you and I are going to work together, we're not like roommates who can ignore each other and just, you take this part of the refrigerator, I take that part of the refrigerator. If you have a bad day, it affects me. If I have a bad day, it affects you. If we don't get along, this baby called the company isn't going to be successful. And so 1 + 1 has to equal 4 at least, hopefully 5 or 6 or 7. But 1 + 1 never equals 2. If you think 1 + 1 equals 2, you're getting no energy amplification. You have a poor impedance match, and 1 + 1 definitely equals less than 2. So you've got to find those entrepreneurial soulmates where even all this rational stuff can be true. But if you don't have energy amplification, you don't have a high-performance team. And that's something that you do not find out until you're under stress. And in our classes, we try to put people under stress. And we say at the end of the class, we say, hey, that doesn't mean you all don't like each other. It just means you shouldn't start a company with each other. Just like when you're getting married, you don't marry everyone you like, I hope. Right? You only marry people where you get that energy amplification.
Right. Well, we've only got 3 minutes left. So
Don't start another question.
no, I'm not.
Burn that down.
Okay, final words, Paulo.
Well, final words is, if you feel passionate about an idea, again, look for the resources that you have available to you. Be open to discuss these ideas with your peers, find your teams, find people, well, they might not be your teams, but just find people that you think synchronize with your ideas and your vision, as Bill was saying. And look for those resources. I mean, the ecosystem that you have available to you.
And there's a lot of them here at MIT.
Yeah, but again, I think it's a lot of the ability to connect different ideas that you might have together with ideas that some other people might have in your lab or outside of it. And as long as you are open to, combine things that way, I think that there's more chances to be successful.
Fiona, final words.
So I was very fortunate to hear Ollie talk to my executive MBA students recently about the space economy. And I was incredibly struck by how large this opportunity is. But I was also struck by the fact that space for the sake of it is not actually going to be the place to build and launch the most extraordinary business. It's being in space to solve really, really big problems. And the reason I think that today the space economy is growing so massively is that space is a place, a context in which we can solve massive problems, whether it's space-based solar because of energy resilience, whether it's data centers in space and so on and so forth, whether it's space launch and imaging because of the conflicts that we're in. So I suppose what I would say is if you're really thinking about space tech, just trying to keep focused on not space for its own sake, but to really think through what are the big global challenges that this can afford us the solution to is really, really important.
All right, Bill, final words.
I don't know anything about space tech. Here's what I know, is the world will never be slower than it is today. That's what I know. In 2018, Brexit happened. We were like, holy cow, that's insane. I can't wait till we go back to the world before Brexit.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, if Brexit was our only problem today. It was like 45 days ago we invaded Venezuela. That also almost seems like a rational thing where we are today, right? I don't want to get political, but the world just keeps going faster and faster and faster, and it never goes slower. It never goes backwards.
Yeah.
And if you think you know what's going to happen tomorrow, you're wrong. And you know what entrepreneurship is? Entrepreneurship is people who thrive in times of change. Every one of you was born an entrepreneur. Every single person, that we wouldn't have survived if we weren't. And the question is, will you bring that out? Will you be a leader of tomorrow by being that person who, when there is change, you can lead to do that? And that's what entrepreneurship is. Entrepreneurship is not about making money. It's about how do you deal with change. Do you see change as an opportunity? Or do you try to, if there's a storm, do you run inside and say, let's wait till the storm's over? Because the storms are just going to get more and more. You got to go out, it's raining outside. Let's go out and dance in the rain and figure out, we're not going to survive the change. We're going to thrive in change. And so I would tell all of you, embrace entrepreneurship. That is what's going to make the difference. If you think you found a safe place where there's no risk, you're wrong. Change is coming for you. And you need to be able to handle it, get out there, embrace invention times commercialization to come up with innovation and be an entrepreneur.
Great. So let's thank our panel.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.